is real? How do you define real? How do you define
You know the 80s miss you, right?
So what's your podcast about?
Oh, it's about psychology, true crime, supernatural stuff, the occasional paranormal or philosophical rant.
Well, maybe I could check it out sometime.
See, the more at peace you become, the less you tolerate chaos. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you.
It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth, to blind you from the truth.
I don't know how much value I have in this universe, but I do know that I made a few people happier than they would have been without me.
Every possible series of events is happening.
All at once.
Live that way, and nothing will surprise you.
Nothing will surprise you. Nothing will.
Just when you think you know something, you have to look at it in another way, even though it may seem silly or wrong.
It's a very strange, funny time where everybody would love to be able to be themselves, but they can't, because they must fall in line with the person in front of them.
The Matrix is everywhere. The Matrix
You want to live that kind of life? I wish you the best. I'll be on the other side somewhere.
The less you tolerate chaos, the less you tolerate chaos.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural. We did not wake up one morning and decide to be distracted. In fact, there was no single moment where humanity said, yeah, let's go ahead and fracture our attention. And then let's call that progress. No, it happened the way most profound changes do. Incrementally, invisibly, and with good intentions. Technology began as an extension of human will, a tool to remember what we could not, a lever to lift what our bodies could not carry, a signal fire against the dark. At its best, it was a prosthesis for limitation, a way of compensating for the fragility of flesh and the narrow bandwidth of the mind. Creating writing preserved memory, creating clocks ordered our chaos, making maps bent the unknown into something navigatable. And each step forward promised freedom. But somewhere along the way, the tool began to regulate the very person it was designed to help. We now live inside systems that do not merely assist us, but change us. Algorithms learn our habits better than our friends do. Devices anticipate our needs before we articulate them. Notifications interrupt, not because they're urgent, but because they are effective. The modern technological environment is not neutral. It is persuasive, adaptive, and relentlessly attentive to one thing: our engagement. Self-regulation, the ancient human task of governing impulse, attention, and desire, has quietly been outsourced. What once required discipline, ritual silence, or wisdom traditions is now mediated by screen schedules and dopamine loops. We're told when to wake, when to respond, when to consume, when to react. The external world hums constantly, and the inner world grows faint by comparison. Now, this is not an argument against technology. It is an argument for awareness. Because the real danger is not distraction itself. Humans have always been distractible. The danger is unconscious distraction, the slow erosion of the interior life, until silence feels uncomfortable and stillness feels like absence, rather than being present. We are increasingly regulated from the outside while remaining dysregulated within. Modern life is crowded with stimuli, but starved of meaning. We scroll through created lives while neglecting our own. We absorb outrage faster than empathy. We are informed, yet rarely transformed, connected, yet increasingly lonely. The tools designed to bring us together often flatten us into abstractions, into avatars or matrices, mere data points. While the human nervous system struggles to keep pace, and yet the story does not end there, because alongside this technological evolution runs another, quieter thread, one that has existed far longer than fiber optics, and silicon. The human capacity for awareness, for compassion, for healing. Mindful practices are not new technologies. They are ancient counterweights. They do not reject the modern world, but they reintroduce something it has misplaced, being present in the now. Whether that's through prayer, meditation, breathwork, contemplation, or intentional silence, these practices return agency to the individual. They are acts of rebellion, profound ones. Awareness begins with noticing the moment your hand reaches for the phone without thinking, noticing the tension carried in the jaw, the tightness of your shoulders, the held breath in your chest, noticing the emotional residue left behind after an hour of scrolling, agitation, envy, numbness. Awareness does not judge these things. It simply reveals them, and revelation is the first step toward freedom. Compassion follows naturally from awareness. When we see ourselves clearly, something will soften in our own hearts. We'll realize that our compulsions are not moral failures, but coping strategies, and that this distraction is often there to mask our inner pain, and that being busy is a great defense against grief. Compassion allows us to hold this truth without condemning ourselves further. And then from compassion, healing becomes possible. And by healing, it does not mean withdrawal from technology or a retreat into asceticism. It means reestablishing right relationship. Technology will become a servant again. It'll become a means, not a surrogate for meaning. Mindful practices create friction in a frictionless world. They slow time just enough for insight to surface. They restore the body as a source of wisdom rather than an accessory for productivity. They remind us that we are not merely users, consumers, profiles. We are participants in a mystery that cannot be optimized. There is a reason silence feels threatening now. In silence, unresolved things rise. In stillness, the self returns. Technology excels at distraction, but it cannot heal what it helps avoid. Only awareness can do that. Only compassion can metabolize suffering rather than suppress it. And so the evolution of technology has given us unprecedented power. The evolution of consciousness must determine how we wield it. We cannot stand at a threshold where the question is no longer what can we build, but who are we becoming while we build it? In a world engineered to fragment us, mindful presence is an act of integrity. In culture driven by acceleration, compassion is a form of resistance. And in an age obsessed with external control, personal healing begins the moment we remember that the deepest form of regulation has always come from within, not through domination, but through awareness, not through distraction, but through being present, and not through machines alone, but through the quiet, stubborn, luminous work of being human. There's a hidden curriculum behind every great civilization taught by those who walk between the seen and the unseen. Long before meditation apps and corporate mindful meditation seminars, a few within the world's most disciplined ranks were being taught something different. Not how to destroy, but how to awaken and steady the mind in the chaos of their world. How to meet fear with focus. These weren't monks, they were warriors, and their teachers knew that strength without awareness is blindness, and awareness without courage is paralysis. Joining us is one who walks the line between meditation and mission. He is the Mindsmith spirit engineer and silent ranger, Dr. Joel Levey. Welcome to Truth and Shadow Podcast.
Thank you, BT. That's a beautiful introduction. I'm really touched by that.
Thank you. So before we get going, can we share a little bit about you and your background?
Yeah, I was born in the Bay Area, grew up in the Northwest, lived in a family where there was a rich blend of suffering and faith. And growing up, I watched my mom come out of an encephalitic coma, paralyzed, and learn how to get all of her motor functions back again. I used to go to a kooky doctor who was doing early biofeedback training with my grandmother, who learned to become really quite a yogi and control her migraines and her backaches that she used to have to get cortisone shots for. And then my grandfather had a really strong contemplative and prayer practice. And little did I know that many years later, all of those would converge to have me, I got interested in the contemplative sciences and mystical traditions when I was about 15. I had teachers in high school who were very thought-provoking. It was the Vietnam days when, for my generation, if we graduated from high school and we weren't going straight into college, we'd be sent off to the draft. So the kind of moral, ethical, soul-searching, spiritual searching field was pretty well primed at that point. And I ended up going to the university and ended up in the consciousness research lab at University of Washington in the early 80s when we were still measuring brainwave. We hook people up and we'd measure their brainwaves with 12-channel Beckman polygraph spitting ink on paper. It was early on in consciousness research, but that really opened so many fields to what is a human being in its deepest dimensionality? What are we capable of? Having grown up in a family where I witnessed pretty radical psychophysical spiritual transformation, I was well primed to then spend, for now, last 55 years of my life deep in this inquiry and deep in the science of it and studying with hundreds of extraordinary teachers from various spiritual traditions and contemplative traditions and doing research, doing clinical work in large HMOs. And our work has been largely as translators, carrying this medicine, carrying this wisdom into the mainstream. Back in the 70s, I started one of the world's first kind of mindfulness and mind fitness clinical programs and a couple of graduate programs back in the days when there was hardly anything like that going on. I really didn't know of anybody else running programs like that or designing and facilitating them. And some years later, I've met like John Kabat-Zinn and Danny Goleman, other people that were pioneers in this field. We go, oh, we all caught the same wave, and East Coast, West Coast, different forms, different versions, but still with this wish to help people awaken to their full potential and to ease the stress and the suffering and the sorrow that we bring to our lives, oftentimes unnecessarily. So it's been a really amazing journey.
Sounds like it. Yeah, one of the things that was interesting to me was that this program you had been involved in the early, the 80s here, and it was basically developed for the special forces that shared some of these core principles that you're talking about within their high intensity environment. Would you talk about that for a little bit for me?
Yeah, it was in the early 80s, a graduate student of mine who was a remarkable man. His name's Bud Cook, Hawaiian, martial arts teacher, ski instructor, deep into extraordinary human performance. Bud connected with a fellow named Lieutenant Colonel Jim Channon, who had been assigned through the Delta Task Force to study the human potential movement in search of inspirations for what might be brought into re-envisioning with the U.S. military, especially the Army, what their vision might be for the year 2000. And this is following on the heels of the My Lai massacre and the cover-up and a very deep, broken spirit in the integrity and the kind of morale and vitality of the Army, especially the armed forces in general. And Bud was invited to a meeting of the Delta Task Force as an Aikido instructor to give an Aikido demonstration. And Bud came back from that meeting. The Delta Task Force at that time was bringing together people from within the military and within the industrial complex who were all really deep in the inquiry of what's possible for human beings. You know, what does peak performance look like at individual and collective levels? How can we create human flourishing and thriving in organizations? How can we be stewards of a thriving planet using the vehicles we have of military resources and organizational and corporate resources to accomplish this? So it's a pretty exciting group of people. And Bud came back from that meeting. I was working at Kaiser Medical Center, and I got running the stress and biofeedback program and the stress clinic and the pain clinic. And my receptionist called me and said, "Hey, Bud Cook's on the phone, says it's urgent. Can you take a call?" And last time Bud had called me, it was this kind of crazy boondoggle of, "Hey, Joel, how'd you like to train the mariners on sailboats in the Bahamas for a month?" You know, it was like, and that didn't come to pass. So I picked up the phone. I said, "What's up, Bud?" And he said, "Hey, Wiz." He used to call me Wiz, as in wizard. "Hey, Wiz, how'd you like to design the Ultimate Warrior training program for the U.S. Army Green Berets, the Special Forces?" And I kind of took a deep breath and said, "Is that for real?" He said, "No, this is really for real. I just came back from this meeting. I met some really heartbroken military leaders from the Pentagon who are living with tremendous shame and grief at how many people are committing suicide coming back from the wars. And they realize they have to change their training paradigm. They have to change their ethos, and they don't know what to do. And they asked me if I had any ideas, and I said I'd come back to town and call you and Michelle and see if we could put together a proposal. Are you game? So it was kind of a shocking call and invitation. I said, "Well, let me talk to Michelle, and we'll get back to you soon." So I went home and pitched the idea, told Michelle about the call and the opportunity. And, you know, keep in mind, I wrote my conscientious objector thesis when I was in high school to stay out of the draft and not go kill people in some ambitious fascist war in Southeast Asia. Michelle had a similar background of protest and peacemaking in various kinds of ways. This is a pretty radical invitation for us. But we paused to consider Trident submarine was coming into Puget Sound, Hood Canal that same week. And most of our friends were out in their kayaks and, protest lines and blockades of various ways. And here we are being asked to invite to design the Ultimate Warrior training program for the Special Forces. But we stopped to think, and we remembered, a story that we had written that during the Cuban Missile Crisis, there would have been a nuclear war if one naval commander, submarine commander, had not refused to follow orders. And he was persecuted and prosecuted for that for the rest of his life. But we realized that, wow, if we had a chance to train the crew of a Trident submarine for 6 months, the world would be a safer place. train them in self-regulation and awareness and moral and ethical and intelligence and tapping into the field of their collective wisdom and just not going into reactive, dysregulated states of being. So that was compelling. And we also had the thought to call one of our teachers, a Tibetan teacher named Kalu Rinpoche, who was an extraordinary yogi and contemplative teacher, and a very authentically wise man. And we had been studying with him. He had just gone to Portland, and we called. We had a number for his translator, and we called and we said to his translator, "Could you go ask Rinpoche about this invitation? We could see that this could be a phenomenally important opportunity not to be turned down. And we could also see that this could be an opportunity to create a lot of bad karma. How do we sort this out?" And so his translator, Chikinema, said, "Yeah, I'll go ask." And he came back in about 10 minutes and he said, "Oh, Kalu Rinpoche says this is a phenomenal opportunity. And if you have a chance to work with people with enormous power and influence who lack the wisdom and compassion to use that power and influence wisely, then absolutely take that on, and you have my full support." So that led us to call Bud back and say, "Okay, let's get together and look at this." So we got together for a long afternoon, basically, and sketched out a 6-month full-time training program for 2 A teams of special forces troops, Green Berets. It would be sort of like 2 SEAL Team 6s. People kind of have that frame of reference. We wrote it up, typed it up, sent it off. A few weeks later, we get a letter back from the logisticians at West Point who had reviewed it, and they said, "This is the most exquisite orchestration of human technology that we've ever seen. Let's go for it."
It's amazing. So basically, you had to take what you understand of the civilian world and reconcile that with the warrior mindset. What was some of those ways that you bridged or fully integrate both of those without causing any kind of contradictions?
Yeah, well, I think there were, expanding the frame of reference to a larger frame of reference or reverence. The contradictions are held within the vastness of what's going on here on the earth right now. There are contradictions. There are polarities. We need to honor those. I think it's helpful to understand this program emerged not only from the grief and the guilt of the military leaders, and not only through the profound visionary influence of Jim Channon, the Delta Task Force, and Channon's work with creating Evolutionary Tactics, a manual for the 1st Earth Battalion, which was this visionary way that the Delta Task Force communicated to the world this vision of the militaries of the United States, but the militaries of the world all becoming earth stewarding forces that would protect people, that would care for people in natural disasters, who would go into places like Gaza or Darfur or Ukraine and Russia and basically get in the way of the conflict and do what they could to do restorative justice and build alliances and find ways to downregulate the conflict. So that was in place within the military and within the culture at that point. There was also the context that what was taking place was during the pretty hot times of the psychic warfare research that was going on. And there was a lot of research into remote viewing and psychotronic influence of biological and electronic systems at a distance through the powers of the mind. And the US and the Soviets and China were putting millions and millions of dollars into funding that research, which was showing pretty mind-blowing results. You know, it's not like it was misplaced research. And so our program kind of rode in on the heels of all of this going on. It's like the field was really well primed, and we were fairly well positioned and prepared to reach out to our network of mentors. Imagine, you know, it's like they said, yes, let's go for the program. And then there was 3 years of red tape, you know, where we got to really design and refine the design for this program. So that gave us a charter for almost 3 years to pick up the phone and call anybody we wanted and say, hey, if you had a chance to work with 25 men who might start or stop the next world war, what would you teach them? So it was an incredible piece of R&D for us to talk to the mind hackers and the brain hackers and biofeedback and neurofeedback and the psychophysical sciences to get the best protocols that we could, and to talk to our contemplative teachers and talk to people working in various fields of trauma, and just to come up with the best design that we could. We had 25 guys essentially full time for 6 months. And we had a lab with about $500,000 worth of biofeedback and neurofeedback equipment. We took the men on a month-long silent meditation retreat that in that context we called the encampment rather than the meditation retreat. We did Aikido with them, training with them every day to teach them a kind of an earth wisdom, indigenous-based martial art that was about harmonizing and blending with attack rather than just standing up strong and whacking harder, you know? So, which was a completely different kind of martial art form than they had learned before. We worked with their families and with their kids. Yeah, it was a profoundly holistic program that we brought to them. And we spent about 2.5 months in the field with them doing mission simulations where, you know, they'd take like what they were learning on the mat and they'd test that in the lab when they were hooked up to devices, giving them really objective feedback on their inner performance levels. Then we go out into the field and do mission simulations where they'd have a chance to see how their self-regulation and energy management skills were working. And, you know, it was a phenomenally well refined training program, working with their families. You know, they were making lifestyle habits in nutrition and in fitness and kind of learning how to humanize themselves to some degree a bit more, because part of the charter was to teach them to make the blend with local populations in areas of operations, to build alliances, to get people to come over to their side, to help them with the missions that they were on. So it was a really extraordinary training program.
Absolutely. Sounds like that. You're talking about the early 80s, and there's a couple of things that I'd read up on. I mean, not just, you know, the psychic warfare and things like that, and a handful of verifiable tested things that were being done, but like there's the gateway process that was really big in 83. You're right. The government was really looking into the way the brain can reach into not just other places on Earth, but other dimensions. And I think that's a real interesting way, or interesting time to have been alive and be doing all of these things.
Yeah. And, you know, the first night of the program, you know, we ran the guys through just a really intense physical challenge program to get some baselines on their physical performance. You know, timing, strength, marksmanship, endurance, energy management, you know. And at the end of that day, the guys went home and cleaned up, and they came back with their families and their girlfriends for an orientation for the families and the significant others. And And you could just feel there was a tension in the field because, some of the spouses and some of the guys, there's this kind of implicit worry in the field that we were going to dose them on the heavy doses of psychedelics or, really bend their minds in ways they might not come back from, like MK Ultra had done. And so part of our job was, really to, like say, no, that's not the kind of program we're doing here. And you'll get to know us through the course of this, and hook their kids up with some of the biofeedback equipment, have them, learn to raise their stress levels and lower it, fly the graphics on the screen through various challenge courses by self-regulating. And at the end of that evening, one of the officers came up to us and he said, "You did a really good job of earning our trust tonight. Well done." And that was really reassuring. So, yeah, it was a very colorful time to be doing this work. And
definitely sounds like it. So, that was an opportunity for me to mention this book and the prime reason why I'm talking to you today. This text that you had put together with obviously yourself and then with your wife, Manual for the Awakening Warrior, the Special Forces Secret Mind, Body, Spirit Training Program. And I thought that would be a good way for me to segue into basically say, Joel, you and Michelle have both been pioneers, obviously, in the neuro and biofeedback training. I mean, that we've been talking about that for 20 minutes so far. But how has that science evolved since both of you first began? Part two of that question is, what key discoveries continue to inform how you teach this inner warrior, this inner performance today?
Yeah, wow, those are great questions, BT. Thank you. Yeah, the technology has really, really evolved. I mean, anybody who's got a Aura ring or something like that is wearing a biofeedback device and is tapped into your phone, and you can, watch the signals and learn to self-regulate. The whole laboratory like we had with the guys there with all of these racks of circuit boards and things, is now on my iPad. And, so the wearables and the capacity to do the neurohacking and the biofeedback work now on the fly or in the field or, with Bluetooth connections rather than cords that get tangled. That's extraordinary, To me, biofeedback and neurofeedback is the most transformative use of technology on the planet in terms of teaching people that the mind pervades the body and can influence and change what's going on. And the biofeedback essentially is, let me just give you a couple of analogies, okay? Basically, if you can slap a sensor on any physiological signal, be it muscle tension, skin temperature, brain waves, ocular dilation, electrical conductance of the skin, if you can put a sensor on that and give somebody real-time feedback on that they can interact with, that person has the potential to learn how to regulate and control or influence that signal. And you can see where this is going. If we could get real-time measures on insulin levels or optimizing blood chemistry or whatever it might be, the potentials for this are extraordinary. And in training people how to control or influence their psychophysical state, it opens this profound sense of confidence, a profound sense of attunement to the subtle signals that are constantly informing us of our internal state. But it also gives this profound sense of confidence that we're not being victimized by our internal states of being, the internal states of our body or our mind. So in that sense, it's just incredibly profoundly empowering for people to know that they can regulate their blood pressure or their insulin levels or their tension levels, that the tension headaches are optional rather than just, that people are victimized by that. So that's profound, and a way to understand how the contemplative work, the mindfulness, and the mind training hooks into the biofeedback is, imagine, just drawing a line in space before you, okay? And everything above this line you're conscious of it, so you're aware of. The signals are strong enough to get your attention, and you're tuned into that. Everything below that line is too subtle for you to consciously be aware of. Even though it's there, you're not aware of it. So the mind training techniques, the mindfulness techniques, refine our awareness and bring them to subtler and subtler and subtler levels. So in a sense, it drops this baseline, it lowers this line, so that what was we previously weren't aware of is now within the field of our awareness, and we can only manage what we monitor. So now we're able to monitor that and recognize, I can increase the tension or I can decrease it. I have a choice here. The biofeedback, in a sense, takes that initial baseline and slaps a sensor on a subtle signal generator below the threshold of awareness, let's say blood pressure. And it boosts that signal to bring it up into awareness where you can interact with it. And so it can accelerate the learning how to listen for and sense for and attune to those subtle levels. So if you're learning how to be more mindful and you're also kind of augmenting this through the technology, you can accelerate the refinement of awareness so that you get to a level where when your blood pressure's going up, when those tensions are starting to kick in. You catch the pre-aura signals of a migraine before the blood vessels kind of pop open from that constriction, and you're able to ease that off rather than just have it rapidly dilate and give the onset of a migraine. And the kind of empowerment that gives to people is extraordinary. I'll tell you one story. It's kind of a funny anecdote, but it applies here. I had a tugboat captain who kind of reminded me of Popeye, one of those kind of cigarettes in his rolled up t-shirt kind of guy.
Right.
Kind of tense and gnarly. And he came in when I was working at the medical center to the pain clinic, and he'd been suffering with chronic pain for probably 20, 30 years. And I hooked him up to muscle tension, an EMG biofeedback device. And he was running about 30 microvolts of tension, which is like extreme tension, And I said, Freddie, it looks like you're really good at holding tension. If you're at 30, can you give me 35? Can you lock it down a little bit tighter? And it's like, and he was able to do that. And I said, great. Can you take it back to 30? Can you take it back up to 35? Can you take it down to 30? Could you drop it down to 28? Can you take it up to 30? Could you drop it down to 25? Great. Take it up to 30. And we just kind of went through this tense and relaxed dance together for about 15 or 20 minutes. And I said, look, you're really good at holding tension, and you have the potential to be really good at letting go of that tension. And you're proving that to yourself, So we did this oscillation, kind of down to 15 microvolts, up to 25, down to 10, and up to 15, And we kind of rocked him in the kind of digital cradle there down to about 3 microvolts of tension, at which point he just erupted in a wave of cussing and swearing and slammed his fist on the table. And he said, my pain is completely gone. Why the hell didn't somebody teach me how to do this 30 years ago?
Right. Right. No, you're onto something there, because I use a Garmin watch and I have ADHD. And one of my issues with that is emotional dysregulation. I mean, this is a pretty common thing with ADHD is emotional dysregulation.
Yeah.
And I can look at my watch and I'm feeling kind of something, and I can look at my watch and go, oh, my stress battery is really low. There's something about to happen. And so literally you can look at your watch, and I know this is on an Apple Watch too. You can do it with the Apple Watch. I don't know about Samsung's, but the Garmin, you can monitor your biofeedback and see when you're coming on to something. And, you know, if you need to take a moment or step away, there's always something available with what we've got. And I'm looking at the world, and one of the things that's, you know, we like you said, we can control with mindfulness. You know, I'm going through mindfulness meditation with my counselor. I have a counselor for my ADHD. So we're working on these things to help regulate the different things and watch where I, you know, how I'm feeling, my heart, my pulse, and everything else kind of leading into one of these eruptions that people have that have ADHD. But something else that I've noticed is this digital distraction, right? It's really easy for people with ADD, ADHD to basically lose themselves in scrolling on the Instagram or the Facebook. And I'm looking at that, and I've been talking to different people about this. And I think that constant stimulus escalation basically in our area, you know, I'm a Zennial, so I'm kind of on the cusp between the Gen Xers and the millennials, but here we are getting ourselves addicted to the constant state of anticipatory reward that some people are living in basically this unraveling, right? We're not closer to being mindful, we're further away from it. And so there's this great turning away from some of these things that you were looking into and working on in the 70s and 80s that have now just splintered and exploded into anti-mindfulness. And how do you deal with that for today?
Yeah. Well, I'm so touched by, you know, your self-disclosure and your own, you know, we're all living in our laboratories, right? And we all came bundled with whatever, you know, issues, challenges, strengths, potentials, and we're all trying to figure it out. I think, you know, BT, your observation of the splintering and then watch how that's playing out in society in terms of just health and loneliness and environmental degradation and social collapse and lack of trust. And it's just, you know, it's crazy making. And at the same time, going back to Joanna Macy's brilliant work, bless her, she just died a couple months ago, talking about the great turning where we're seeing the collapse of so many unsustainable ways of living and ways of organizing, so many social structures that are collapsing because they were built on premises that aren't congruent with reality. Yeah. And here, so there's the great turning back towards sense making and congruence with reality and paying attention rather than checking out. And I think that's where our individual and collective salvation lies. There's this wonderful way of looking at this, and this could be a really useful tool for you. And I think a lot of people listening to this in the book, in Awakening Warrior, a manual for the Awakening Warrior, the Special Forces Secret Mind, Body, Spirit training program. We have a diagram in there that comes out of the Presencing Institute at MIT that comes from Otto Scharmer, who's a really wise guy and an old friend. We met Otto over 30 years ago. And he talks about the contrast presencing and absencing. Okay, presencing is an analog for mindfulness, absencing analog for mindlessness. So when we're presencing, we're able to suspend our judgments and open our hearts and our minds to just drop deeper and deeper into the moment, into the raw signal of reality as it is here, and rest in a state of spacious, open, non-labeling, non-differentiating registration of the raw signals of life. okay? Where we can be informed by what's arising in the body, what's arising in the mind, what's present here without needing to push any of it away and without needing to embellish or complexify or reify any of it. So we drop into that with a question or a need or a prayer. We're able to source a deeper kind of insight and intuition. And then we're able to bring that back into our life and mobilize it or prototype it or put that into action. Or we realize, well, I'm hungry. I need to eat, or I'm stressed, I'm tired, let me take a nap, or I have to pee, let me go make a fluid adjustment, through that mindfulness. But the mindfulness is contrasted by this tendency to pull away from reality, to dissociate, to go out of touch, and to absence ourselves. And as we absence ourselves, we go into denial. We go into fantasy, we go into story, we go into conjured up hallucinations that lead us to other people or harm them or exploit them or destroy the earth and the habitat that we're abiding in, because we're so out of touch with our bodies, with our minds, with our field of relationships and our environment. And, it's coming back to this sense of until we find the courage. And this book uses the story of this kind of mind-blowing historic secret program for the special forces and the kind of courage it took for them to learn to sit in the fire of the shitstorm of their own fear, their own regret, their own shame, their own outrage and turbulence, and find the peace within the turbulence and the clarity and the confusion, and to not absence from that, to not pull away from that, but be able to source wisdom and guidance and strength and find a deeper kind of courage in that. We took these guys on a month-long silent mindfulness-based meditation retreat called the Encampment. And before we went into that encampment, a lot of the guys were kind of sneaking up to us on the sly and saying, I'm scared. I do all this stuff. I jump out of airplanes and free fall till the treetops and open my chute. I done all this crazy macho soldier shit. And you're telling me that I'm going to have to sit with my own mind in silence for a month? I'm going to go effing crazy on you. It's just, how am I going to do this? But we said, look, if you get dropped thousands of miles behind enemy lines to do deep reconnaissance, because in those days there were only 300 satellites in the sky rather than 30,000 like now. So the only way to get a signal out of those places was to send eyeballs there, And that's the kind of mission these guys had. They weren't expected to get out alive. Our mission was to, increase their chances of getting out by giving them the skills to be able to deal with their inner enemies and make peace with the turbulence within. So we took them on a month-long silent retreat where they had to burn through that kind of fear and learn to recognize and befriend their inner enemies. And part of their mission was to be still and silent for long periods of time, and not get found and shot. So it was a well-placed training protocol to take them on that and to help them develop the kind of confidence and the kind of deep resilience skills and deep awareness skills to be able to function in that mode and to know that they could pull it off. And at the end of that let me go back to the absencing and presencing. To appreciate the incredible damage we do to ourselves, the incredible damage we do to our families, our communities, our environment, because we're checked out into this mindless absencing. And to appreciate, what a profound capacity it is to be able to just sit even for 5 or 10 seconds with the compulsion to check your phone and just feel the burn, and to smile to yourself and go, addictive tendencies to scroll are with me. This is a moment of suffering, may I find some self-compassion for myself. May I be kind to myself as I ride this through, and I unclench my fists, my mental fists, my physical fist around this tendency. May I find greater spaciousness, greater self-compassion, greater ease with this. And as I do, may my own dilation with this, my own kind of opening around this, maybe ease the tension in the field of all beings who share this larger body of life with me, so that I can be ennobled in this moment of pause and non-reactivity to a compulsive tendency by recognizing that as I stop the war within myself, maybe I'm helping ease those tensions within the minds and bodies of all beings. And that's where it really gets juicy. This is in kind of the spirit of the Bodhisattva warrior tradition, of the Mahayana tradition that comes out of Asia, of dedicating our own healing, our own awakening for the benefit of all beings. And that's where these kind of the Shambhala warrior archetypes and these kind of warrior monk archetypes really draw their strength, is when we realize that we're not doing these practices and these arduous tasks or whatever simply for ourselves. We're being ennobled by doing this with this Bodhisattva warrior spirit intention of developing these capacities and burning through these reactive toxic patterns that don't serve us. We're healing ourselves so that more healing is available for all beings who share the larger body of life with us in the seamless fabric of wholeness that we're all embedded within. That's where it really gets juicy. That's where the work kind of goes from being ego-driven, self-development, get me a red bicycle, kind of me first kind of compulsion, into a really ennobled altruistic endeavor.
Yeah, so with all of that, for somebody who's listening to our show now, who may be curious about what we've been talking about, but specifically they feel like they don't have the time, they don't have the resources, they don't have that military discipline of like the Green Berets or something going on. What would be, besides read this book, what would be your recommendation for as that first manageable step into this kind of mindful meditational training?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I really feel your heart in this interview, BT. Mm-hmm. I get that you're not just looking for some inspirations for yourself, but you really want to generate a wave through the field of your operations that brings hope and healing and possibility to other people. And my eyes are moistened by that, which, to me is an indication of truth. So where do we begin? I think one is to just bust through the idea that it's selfish or that it takes a lot of time. That you're walking down the street. To be mindful of walking down the street doesn't take any more time. It's about presence. You're drinking a beer, or you're eating a meal. You're beginning a task and it has a duration and you're completing that task. Give yourself like these mini challenges of, as I walk from my car into Costco, I will walk mindfully, As I begin this conversation with BT, I'm going to hold the intention to show up wholeheartedly and to stay present. And I will monitor my attention to see if it starts to stray. and bring it back when it does for the duration of this period. And at the end of that, maybe I'll just pause for a moment to say, how did I do? Was 100% there in the game, or was it 20%? It's just, okay, 20% is better than 15. Let's rejoice in that. And so there's just all these micro challenges throughout the day of can I set my heart, my mind, my intention to be wholeheartedly present. And there's an acronym for this: to be curious, to be open, to be accepting of whatever it is that's arising. It doesn't mean we like it, but it's noisy or it's quiet, it's easy or it's hard. We just acknowledge that's what it is. Curious, open, acknowledging or accepting, with a quality of warm-hearted, loving awareness, okay? So that could be the acronym of COLA, C-O-A-L, or COLA, curious, open, accepting, loving awareness, yeah? And you could start, first thing in the morning. This is actually a really beautiful device, especially if you're device addicted, is to challenge yourself that the first moments of your day before you log on to your prosthetic brain, that you'll calibrate your own internal operating system. Okay, so the challenge in this is the first moment of the day that you're awake, to recognize that and rejoice. There's a lot of people that didn't wake up today. That's no small thing, so not to take it for granted and to really recognize that first moment of the day that you're awake. Ideally, that's still when you're in bed or sitting on the edge of your bed. Once you challenge yourself and you take this as a discipline, it may be 3 hours into the day and you're miles away from your home, and the kind of the mindless zombie troublemaker in you has been on autopilot for the last 3 hours, and now you get your wits about you. Start there, Give thanks it wasn't 4 hours, but so the first moment of the day that you're awake, recognize that and rejoice in that. The second step is to pause for a few moments of gratitude. Do a system check. Wow, my eyes still work. Bless my eyes. My toes still wiggle. Bless my toes. My dog's still here with me. Bless my dog, or my partner, the roof is still on my head. No mean, nasty people busted in last night or there wasn't an earthquake. Living in the Northwest, that's always something to give thanks for. You just count your blessings and let your heart reach out with with the light of thanksgiving and blessings into the field, saying thank you. So awake that you're awake, gratitude and blessings. Then remember, in a world of change and impermanence and death and impermanence, this is a precious day. This is not to be taken for granted. How do you want to live this day? So remembering death and impermanence, then listen for your intention. Set your intention for the day. Source your guidance for the day of what's important for me to remember and stay true to today, and listen for that. And be ennobled by, how do you source that guidance? How does that come to you? Does it have a voice? Does it have a feeling? How do you know that today you want to show up more wholeheartedly, or be more kindful, or be more patient, or less non-reactive, or whatever it may be? Set your intention for the day at a personal level, but then also set the universal harmonic to that intention for the benefit of all. May I be less reactive today, so that all beings, the potential for all beings is to be less reactive today. May I be more kindful, so that the people I interact with feel blessed by our encounters rather than disappointed or harmed by it. So set your intention. And then a last step, if you've got the frame of reference or reverence for that, is just reach out into the field that you draw strength from. Reach out to Jesus, reach out to Mary, reach out to the Buddha, reach out to Aunt Mabel, reach out to all the kind mentors or wise mentors you've had in your life, or the BTs of the world whose podcasts you listen to and draw strength from. And kind of call in their energy, call in their spirit to support you. And let your heart again reach back to them and say, thanks for being here in my life, and thank all of the mentors who you relied on and all the mentors that they relied on back through the ancestors and the lineages, that we can draw this strength in, receive this goodness and the strength to steady us, to help us stay true, to tap back into this throughout the day. And we can radiate our blessings, our thanksgiving into the field, and to appreciate these are the kinds of practices we were teaching to the special forces. Imagine being out there thinking, damn, I just have to rely on all the stuff I've got in my packer that's bundled in my devices, versus realizing I've got access to the cloud. I've got access to the field and the network, and I can call in the reconnaissance and the inspiration and the information that I need from that vast connectivity. And I'm not just out here alone by my sorry ass self. Yeah. So this is a way to start the day. Okay. And then throughout the day, stay true to your intention. Keep coming back to it again and again and again and again whenever you wander off. Do these little mini challenges of setting an intention before you start an encounter or a walk or an activity. Stay present through it. Reflect at the end and maybe send out a big cosmic wave of Yahoo at the end and dedicate yourself to getting better at this. And then at the end, do that throughout the day. And then at the end of the day, pause and reflect. What did I learn today? What did I learn about myself? What did I learn about being human? Getting to know my own neuroses, my own frustrations, my own grief, sadness and glory teaches me about the goodness in other people too, the potential in others. And maybe to gather all the momentum of that, the goodness of that at the end of the day, and just play it back into the field just as a wave or a wish or a prayer. May my learning today, my dedication, my patience with myself, my self-compassion today, may this lift the hearts and spirits of all beings in this larger body of life. And to appreciate, these are the kinds of practices that we shared with the special forces, for 6 months, full time. And they're coming back out of field operations and out of gut-breaking gut checks that they ran and saying, wow, I was, how'd you get through that? You're 39 years old. You're the oldest guy on the team. How'd you bust your way through that? And one of the guys said, yeah, I did that heart thing you taught us, of just pumping positive energy, drawing it to others who were really struggling, drawing strength from the field, as well as all the scientific stuff, that they had learned, and the martial arts stuff and the self-regulation training. So, and we did the manual for the Awakening Warrior book, but we've got a bunch of other books. If people just search for Levey, Levey, Joel and Michelle, we've got a book called Living in Balance, Mindful Ways to Thrive in a Complex World, a book on mindfulness, mind fitness, and meditation, a book on the fine arts of relaxation, concentration, and meditation, luminous mind, wisdom at work. Our website is wisdomatwork.com. There's a lot of stuff posted there in the resource section. So if any of this is resonant, we also send out daily inspirational emails. So people can reach out to us through wisdomatwork.com and get hooked up with that. It's a free offering.
It's fantastic. I was going to actually have you drop your website name. That was my last question. But okay, so obviously you got the several books and you've listed a lot of those out, and I'll make sure to make any kind of links in the show notes. But
thank you.
What can people find on your website? I mean, there's a lot of stuff here that I've scrolled through that you gave, you in your little packet you sent me. There's a lot of stuff here. What is one or two things that you would recommend people kind of come and look at? And I could probably hyperlink those with the show notes specifically.
Yeah, there's one link, I think, just given the heartfulness that you brought into this, there's one link we have, wisdomatwork.com/greatcompassion, which have some really good links for just ways to, be more patient, more compassionate, more disciplined with ourselves. So if you put in a link to that, if you put in a link to wisdomatwork.com/Levey's Awakening Warrior, that gives a bunch of information on the book. And then if you could put in a link to the resource section, the top bar on the Wisdom at Work site, and the resources, there's a bunch of readings, and a lot of the pages that are linked there just have a zillion other links to kind of tunnel on out for those of us that like to just find cool stuff, So and there's also a website that we posted. It's Wisdom and Compassion, wisdomandcompassion.us. wisdomcompassion.us. It's a treasure trove of readings and meditations and recordings. And we also have a YouTube channel. If you could put in the link for the YouTube channel, it's youtube.com/wisdomatwork, like all together, Wisdom at Work, no spaces. And there's a bunch of really good talks and lectures, and at the World Government Summit or British Parliament or different places where we've taught over the years. So we've really been fortunate to basically meet human beings who care about other human beings, who've helped smuggle us into the belly of the beast and into mainstream organizations where there's other warm, fuzzy, vulnerable human beings that are bundled with a tremendous amount of suffering and pain and an incredible amount of potential yet to be realized. So, we did the largest online program that Google ever did with their mindfulness and meditation laboratory that streamed out to all of their website, all of their Google sites and places like that. So we've really been fortunate to have the creative challenge of how do we translate this deep ancient wisdom and this hyper-technical, amazing scientific wisdom into ways that just ordinary people can wrap their heads and their hearts around it and find value, or kids can find value in it. So those websites that I've listed, I'd say just give a generous list of those.
Sure, of course.
That would be great, BT.
Yeah. No, thank you, Joel. I really appreciate your time for coming on my show and talking to me about these things.
Yeah, we'll definitely send us a link, and we'll put this out to our network as well. And I think as we reach the conclusion of this, I'd like it kind of in the spirit that we've been talking about here to invite the two of us and anybody who's fortunate to find their way into this recording, just to pause for a moment and consider what inspiration has arisen for us, what goodness has awakened within us through listening to this with curiosity and openness, acceptance and loving awareness, and to bring that goodness into our hearts and just let it ripple out to the ends of space or flow from our hearts into the hearts of all beings and lift their spirits or open their wisdom eyes or touch their sacred hearts, that they too might find some inspiration or some relief or some portals of possibility might open to them because we've had the good fortune to meet together in this way.
You take the blue pill, the story ends.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.
It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth, to blind you from the truth.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
You take the red pill. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
You know the 80s miss you, right? You know the 80s miss you, right?
You stay in Wonderland.
Nothing will surprise you. Nothing will surprise you.
Believe whatever you want to believe.
It's a really strange, funny time. Everybody would love to be able to be themselves. They can't. Because they must fall in line with the person in front of them.
The truth. Nothing more.